Today, I'm going to show you how to remove logos from clothing in Photoshop. Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning Photoshop and photography fun. And in today's episode, I'm going to show you how to remove logos from clothing in Photoshop. Not this logo, because this one's pretty important to me, but oftentimes during a photo shoot, you're going to have a client who's wearing a logo, or maybe they just have some like obscene writing on their t-shirt, or it's an off-brand, and whether you're just doing this for your own work or for a client, sometimes they're like, oh, can you remove that little logo? You know, if your client is like a bank and there's like a Nike logo on there, it may make sense to remove these logos. So we've got a great example image that you can actually download on our website. Just follow the link in the description right down below. So we've got a couple of logos on the hat and on a shirt. Now with this, we're going to show you a few different techniques for getting rid of logos, because sometimes you have like texture and detail in clothing. So we're going to show you how to use the clone stamp tool as well as the transform tool to actually copy texture from one part of an image to another one and then transform and warp it into place so it actually looks like you've got a repeating texture. It's going to be a great episode, guys. Let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. Okay guys, here's our image for today. Now we've got a lot of logos, and we're actually going to remove all of this here on her hat, this guy right up here, and down here on her shirt. So to start off, let's make sure we create a new layer. Okay, and we're going to start off with this little slope logo. So let's go ahead and zoom in there. Now you can see with this logo, we've got a lot of like detail here in the hat, so I can't just paint black right over top of that. Now my recommendation is anytime you have a logo here that's right in the middle of detail, I would recommend copying detail from different parts of your image. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of this detail that's here and copy it over on that side, and we're going to take some of this detail that's here and copy it over to cover it up on that side. Now we're going to be using the clone stamp tool to do this. So let's go ahead and delete that real quick. I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp layer. So you want to be on your clone stamp tool. Now you want to make sure also you're on a new layer here, okay? And you want to make sure your sample says you're going to be sampling the current layer and below. So it's going to sample this layer and the below layer. Okay, so what I'm going to start off is basically creating a patch of just this texture. So with our clone stamp tool selected, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click right here. That's going to create our sample point. And then basically, I'm just going to start painting right over here. And I need to create for myself a patch of this texture. There we go. And we'll go right up to about where the logo is. Now, if you wind up clone stamping a little bit of the logo, that's okay. You can always use your eraser tool or a layer mask to just get rid of it. I'm going to hit E for the eraser tool, and we're just going to erase that away. We don't need that part of the texture. Okay, great. So that's like half of our texture there. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing with the left half. So we're going to create a new layer. You always want to do this on new layers here. So let's create a new layer, S for the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to just sample this point here, and there we go. We're just going to paint right over here. And I'm not really concerned about getting this in the right place just now. We're actually going to warp this and transform it into place. So we've got two different layers, each with their own texture. So let's show you how to do this. Now, to make it a little bit easier, I'm just going to lighten our image a little bit. We're going to go to an adjustment layer, go up to curves, and I'm just going to click and drag this up a little bit. Now this, on the top of everything here, what this does is it just brightens everything that's below it. And I'm going to turn this off when we're done with it. I'm just using this to kind of help me line things up and make sure everything looks good. Okay, so let's start off with this layer here, this layer 1. I'm going to use my move tool. So click on your move tool right here, or hit V for your move tool. And then we're going to start putting this in place. Now, quickly we're going to see we got a couple issues. One, it's like, it's going up and we need it to actually be straight across there. So what we need to do is hit Control or Command T for our transform. So Control or Command T, and then I'm just going to skew this into place. So hold Control or Command, and you can click on any one of these corners here. So just hold Control or Command, and for instance, if I click here, I can start skewing it this way. Okay? There we go. I can skew this part up that way, and if I go right over here, I can rotate that around. All right. So we're basically just skewing this into place. So we're taking the texture that was, there we go, taking the texture that was right over here, and we're just kind of placing it right over top of the logo. So let's hit enter there. Now in this case, I know it's not perfect just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a layer mask. So let's click on our layer mask icon. Okay, and now we basically want to paint black on our layer mask where we don't need this layer. Okay, so like over top of her face, we definitely don't want this there. Over top, you know, right up here, we don't want it to be visible up there. All right, there we go. And it's blending in really nicely up on the top there. There we go. Okay, that looks great. So we've got half of our logo in place. Let's go ahead and get this other half. So the same thing we did with this one side. We're just going to use our move tool here. And now I'm going to hit Controller Command T to transform this. Okay. Now Controller Command and click on our corners here, and there we can go. We can just start kind of like warping this up into place. Now it also is helpful sometimes to just lower the opacity of your layer a little bit to see kind of like where you actually need to cover up. All right. So that looks pretty good. Now you can warp this at any time. So if you don't get it the perfect like when you're transforming this, okay? If you don't get it like, let's say you do that on accident or whatever, you can just do this again and again. So it doesn't have to be perfect the first time, which I always like. Okay, so now it's about in the right place. Let's go ahead and bring our opacity up. I'm going to click on my layer mask icon again, and I'm going to fill this layer mask with black. So let's go to Edit, down to Fill, and go to black. And now I just want to paint white on my layer mask right over top of this logo, and we'll have that blend in from one. There we go. From one texture to another. Okay, and you can see it still doesn't look perfect, so I'm going to hit Controller Command T, and we're just going to warp this into place. There we go. Let's stretch it around a little bit and just rotate it around a little bit more. All right, so turning that off and on, yeah, we're looking pretty good. Now, the other thing that you're going to notice here, okay, is these are not lining up perfectly in terms of color. Like this is a little bit too, like, see the transition here? This just goes from like light to dark, okay? It doesn't really look that real. So what we're going to do here, and this is actually the most complicated part of the tutorial. Let's just stretch this back over just a little bit more. And right back up there. Cool. So what we're going to do here is I just need to darken part of this layer. Okay? So to darken just part of a layer, you can do this in a lot of different ways. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an adjustment layer. So let's go to our hue saturation adjustment layer. There we go. And now I can just lower the lightness just like this. Now you're going to see that when I lower the lightness, it's actually doing this to the entire image, right? It's doing this to everything that's under this layer. So if I want my hue saturation layer to just affect this layer here, okay, just affect this little layer here, right there, all I have to do is right click on the hue saturation layer and go to create a clipping mask. And you're going to see we've got a little arrow here now. This arrow is going to point to this layer, meaning it's only affecting that layer. And check that out. It's just affecting that layer now, which is really, really fun. So let's go ahead and bring the saturation down. We brought our lightness down a little bit. And then on this layer mask, I'm just going to paint black with a soft edge brush, just like that. And what we're doing basically is creating a much more natural transition from the light to the dark. Okay? There we go. So we can see there's the before. We still have a little bit of the logo peeking out. And then there we go. We've got our transition from the light to the dark. And then we've got this guy. Let's go ahead and lighten this one up a little bit. So I'm going to go to hue saturation. There we go. Okay, I'm going to make sure to clip this. So let's right click and go to create a clipping mask because I only want to affect this little area here, right? And I'm going to go to click on this colorize button. There we go. And let's just bring our saturation down just a little bit more. And then bring this back to like that purplish color. All right, let's bring our saturation down just a little bit more. There we go. So we're kind of colorizing to fit with the rest of the image. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now let's turn our curves adjustment layer back on. We can go ahead and zoom out and see, okay, cool. Did that actually look good? Does our covering up the layer work for us? And just turning this invisible again, I think it does. I'm going to lighten this whole area a little bit because it's still a little bit dark. And guys, this is the hardest part of the whole tutorial. So we'll just lighten this up a little bit. I'm going to hit Control or Command I on that layer mask. And there we go. We'll just lighten this up a little bit. Okay. And if your color still isn't perfect, like mine, the color on mine still isn't perfect, really easy way to do this. You can just create a new layer and hit B for the brush tool. Okay. And then just sample like the color that you want. So I'm just going to sample this color here. We're going to paint right over here. Just like that, okay, and we can just change this from normal down to color, and it's just going to change it all to that color, okay? Because sometimes you can see here, there we go, there's the before. See, it's just like kind of grayish, and I didn't do a perfect job matching that color. Sometimes color matching can be really difficult. So sometimes you could just grab a new layer, sample a color, and paint right over top of there, and we'll just lower down our opacity a little bit more. All right. Cool, and there we go. We're looking pretty good. So basically, getting rid of that little slope logo is pretty easy. Now, let's just finish this up real quick here. I'm going to use my clone stamp tool on a new layer just to clone stamp this all the way up to the top there. There we go, just to finish out this pattern. Pretty cool. Okay, so you can just see I was extending that up just a little bit, and it's very easy to do that with the clone stamp tool. Okay, so basically just replacing that logo. So I know it was a lot of different steps there, but basically what we're doing is we're using the clone stamp tool to copy the texture. So we got texture from one side and the other, okay? We go ahead and put those on separate layers, and then we put them into place. We had to warp and transform those into place. And then once they're in place, basically we just try to match the light and the color. So if you can do this on your first go, perfect. You can see it took me a little bit of adjustment. This is not the easiest thing to do. So that's when you're trying to get rid of a logo and you have like texture and color beneath your logo. Now we're going to jump in. We're going to be replacing the logo on her shirt, and because she's wearing mostly just a black shirt with not a lot of texture, this is going to be a little bit easier. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. I'll show you how to remove all that logo, all the text and the graphics on her shirt. So jumping back into our image, now here's our group one. This is all of our first logo there. Okay, so that's the slope logo removed. Now zooming in here, the thing that I want to look at first here, let's turn our curves adjustment layer back on just to lighten it up a little bit so I know what I'm doing here. What I'm looking at is this shirt, because it's relatively dark and there's not a whole lot of texture on here, what I can actually use is the brush tool to just simply paint a lot of this area away. Now, when people are thinking about removing or getting rid of blemishes, a lot of the time they think about the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool, and those tools are really great. But don't forget about the brush tool. If you're dealing with an area that doesn't have a lot of texture like this, the brush tool is actually the easiest tool for the job a lot of the time. So let's create a new layer, and I'm going to hit B for the brush tool. Now to use the brush tool to get rid of this stuff, it's really easy. Simply hold Alt or Option and sample the color right next to it. So Alt or Option, I'm going to sample this color, okay? And then I'm just going to paint right over top of that little area with my shirt. Just make sure your curves adjustment layer is off when you do this, okay? So curves adjustment layer is off. There we go. And we're just sampling this color right there, and I'm just painting right over top of that. All right. So you're like, oh, that is kind of easy. Yeah, exactly. Now, obviously, if this was a situation where there were a lot of like textures and colors and things like that, this is not going to work the same, right? If you're just using your brush tool, with the brush tool, you're basically going to get just a color. Now, I painted over the bottom part of that logo. Let's turn our curves adjustment layer on. I want to just crank this up a little bit so you can see. Let me just bring that right up there so you can see what's going on here. So you can see the area where I painted this with this curves adjustment layer, okay? And if you zoom out, it looks a little bit blotchy. So what I would recommend doing is after you're done like actually painting over the area you want to get rid of, okay, then just grab a big brush. So click with your brush tool and hold, you can right click and bring your size really, really far up, or you can hold Control and Option So Control and Option and click and drag to the right. Okay, left and right is going to make your brush larger and smaller, and up and down is going to be harder and softer. Okay, so this is the Mac keyboard shortcut. Control, Option, click and drag left or right or up and down. If you guys are on a PC, you're going to want to hold Alt and Control and then right click and drag up and down and left and right. Okay, so let's just grab a large brush here and sample this, and we're just going to smooth this out. That's the whole point of that. It's just to smooth that transition out. Because if you just paint like little areas, sometimes it looks a little bit blotchy. Okay, so let's continue with the same techniques here. There we go. We're just going to sample these areas and paint them in. Now, right when we're getting close to the hair, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave a lot of that for now, especially like here inside of the hair detail, because we're going to use our clone stamp tool to actually sample and there we go, to sample and replicate the hair. So anytime you have a decent bit of texture like hair or what we had on her hat earlier, you know, that's a really good time to use your healing brush tool or the clone stamp tool. Okay, so you can see I'm just sampling different colors here, like with the changes in color of the shirt. Because even though this is a very dark shirt, it still changes from light to dark, right? Like you can see, this is darker, this is lighter, it's darker here. So you want to make sure you sample with the color changes and light changes of the shirt. And what I'm getting here is pretty blotchy. That's okay though, we're just getting rid of that logo. So you can see all that's pretty blotchy, but check this out. See, I'll just make this lighter so you can see, yep, I just sampled those colors and it is pretty blotchy. But if I just now grab a big brush, okay, let's make that large soft edge brush, okay, and I'm gonna bring my flow down to like 30%. So hit Shift 3, or you can just click over here and bring your flow down to about 30%. I'm just gonna sample here, and now with a big brush, we're just gonna sample and kind of blend that all in together, okay? So the first thing you want to do is lay down your colors, and then the next is just kind of like blend everything together. There we go. Cool, and it doesn't look blotchy anymore. It looks like, you know, the actual texture and fabric and detail of the shirt itself, which is exactly what we want. Cool, see that? Really nice. Okay, let's do the center here. So again, still with my brush tool, guys. So grabbing colors from the shirt, Alt or Option to sample, and you can see I'm doing this over and over again. It's not like you sample once and you're good to go forever, right? You gotta, if you want to paint here, you gotta sample there and paint around there. Okay, I'm gonna sample again and continuing to sample. And you'll notice this area here, like with the hair, I'm just kind of like staying away from that for now. Getting pretty close to it, but we're going to use our clone stamp tool to take care of the hair areas. The areas. All right. There we go. And just bring this in. Whoever's logo this is going to be real excited that I'm spending this much time removing it, but it totally happens all the time when, you know, in photography, you're like, oh, okay, well, this photo should look good, but, you know, they're wearing some silly designs. Not saying that this company is silly, but, you know, if it's, especially if it's like just a shirt that says like, you know, like my family's cooler than yours or whatever, then yeah, get rid of that. It's ruining your photo shoot. Okay, so there we have basically all that we just did with a brush tool. So now we do have some of these areas, right? Some of these areas, let's get rid of this too. My family is cooler than yours. Okay, so we've done all that with the brush tool. Now let's go in here. We're going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to use our clone stamp tool. So let's hit S for the clone stamp tool, and now it's time to clone stamp hair from one area to another one. Okay, so sample the hair. So Alt or Option to sample hair, and you can sample from different parts of the hair to make things interesting. There we go. Sample from a little bit of a dark patch of hair there. Cool. And let's just sample hair from like right over here. All right, there we go. And if you do something that doesn't look good, just erase it or hit undo. It's the beauty of Photoshop. You can just hit undo at any time. And I always recommend working on new layers because it gives you a lot more freedom later on. You can simply undo your choices and turn these layers off and on, change blending modes and things like that. All right, so you can see I'm just literally clone stamping hair, you know, from one area to another one. Cool, so getting rid of that stuff. All right, pretty nice. Now let's do the same thing over here. Okay, so sample this hair here and paint it right down there. All right, and sometimes you'll sample, or you know, you'll try to replicate hair and it won't look great. It's not a big deal. Just erase it and sample some more hair. And try to like paint with the directionality of the hair. That's another, like, you know, if hair's kind of coming this way, sample and then kind of like paint it with the directionality of the hair. Okay, pretty cool. So you can see all that stuff in the hair areas, we're just using our clone stamp tool to get rid of that right there. Okay, so first step was use the brush tool. We got rid of all that with just the regular brush tool, and then with our clone stamp tool, we just copied some hair into there. Okay, great guys. Well, we're almost done here. We just got one more logo to do on our hat. And the reason I chose to do this image because it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of logos, there's a lot of different things going on, and I wanted to make sure to give you all the tools and techniques you actually need to know to replace the logo. So obviously, like, you can actually download this exact image. Just follow the link right down below and you can download this from Phlearn.com. But obviously you can use all these tools and techniques on your own photos. Okay, let's jump back in. We're going to finish up the hat and then we'll be done. So let's go ahead and finish up this hat. We're going to create a new layer and let's go ahead and zoom in here. Now, as I zoom in, you can see basically what we've got here is we've got a texture going on here and then a similar texture right up here. Okay, it's just a little bit darker and it has less color in it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this texture that's right here and then we're going to duplicate it and move it up. So let's hit S for the clone stamp tool. I'm going to sample this area here and then I'm just going to paint it right up here. Okay, so I just want to create a copy of this texture on a new layer. That's my whole goal here. All right, and let's zoom out. I'll move it right over here so you can see. You know what? I can't even see that because I did it right over top. So let's just sample right over here and we'll just put this over there. I just want to make sure I got the entire texture area that I need. All right, there we go. So this texture now we're going to just like pop, we're going to replace over there and stretch it up. So let's lower the opacity a little bit, okay, so we can see what we're doing. Use your move tool to kind of just move it around. So this texture right here, okay, we're just going to replace what's going on here with this other one. So let's just move it up there. Now I know this is not going to be perfect as it is right now, but let's go ahead and mask it in and see how it looks. So we'll bring our opacity back up to 100%, okay? I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask, and that's going to give us a black layer mask, making this layer invisible. Okay, and then on the layer mask for this layer, I'm just going to paint this in right over top of these words here. All right, and I know this is not going to be perfect right now, but it should get us pretty close. Okay, that looks pretty good. So just turning this off and on, that looks good. Now, some things you can do to make it not look just the exact same. Let's click on our layer. I'm going to hit Control or Command T. Right click and go to warp. Okay, and I can just kind of like warp this around a little bit and that's just going to help like fit the different texture and the different, there we go, the different shape of that area up there. Okay, so let's hit enter there. That looks a little bit better, kind of warped in. And if it doesn't cover everything completely, don't worry about it because you can just clone stamp in those little areas. Okay, so now the other thing that I want to note here is that this original's texture, see it's like purple here, but this is pretty much black and it doesn't have a lot of contrast, right? So let's just zoom out a little bit. First, let's go ahead and lower the contrast. So clicking on this layer, we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, and then I'm going to go to Brightness/Contrast, and we're gonna lower down the contrast, okay? So we don't, when it's high contrast, you have your lights are light and your darks are dark. Lower contrast just kind of puts things more towards gray. And now we're just gonna lower down the brightness there. All right, cool. So somewhere around there looks pretty good. So just lowering, and you can see how that just fits in a little bit better. Now it's still got some color in it. So let's go ahead and go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, and I'm just gonna lower the color of that layer, okay? There we go. All right, that's looking pretty good. It still has a little bit too much contrast. You can see like the dark lines here and the light line there. Okay, the original one doesn't have that so much. We don't see the dark and the light there. So we'll just go to Image, Adjustments, and I'm gonna go to, again, we'll just go to Brightness and Contrast and lower the contrast of that a little bit and then lower the brightness down. Okay, there we go. So now we're looking better. We have a lot more of the original texture going on. So we can see we have some little areas all right up here that the original area didn't quite cover, which is really just not that big of a deal. All we have to do is create a new layer right above there, and I'm gonna hit S for the clone stamp tool, and we can just start filling these little areas in. So clone stamp, just, kind of little fixes here. There we go, that's really easy. We've taken care of the majority of the area and the majority of the texture. So now what we're doing, let's just see what we're covering here. What we're doing is just kind of filling in the gaps. So there's a little bit of brightness there, not a big deal. S for the clone stamp tool, just sample right there and paint in your gap and you're good to go. Okay, so turning that off and on, I mean, looks pretty dang good, right? We basically just replaced that logo. All right, let's use our layer mask and just layer mask that bottom part in that we don't need. All right, cool. And then right above it, I'm just gonna clone stamp a couple of things here to make it look more like the original one. All right, well, look at that. We've just replaced that logo as well with nothing. So let's go ahead and zoom out, guys. We've done a great job. So zooming out here, we've got all three logos here in different groups. And this curves adjustment layer was just to see what we're doing, and we can see everything looks good there. So let's delete that. So here we have our before image. We have our first logo removed, our second logo removed, and our third. Okay, guys, and that's all there is to removing logos in Photoshop. If you want to do this yourself, just follow these key steps. First, you want to identify if there are any patterns or textures behind the logo on your piece of clothing. And if they are, that's a great time to use the clone stamp tool. Now, if you don't have enough information to cover your entire texture or logo, you can do this in parts, like we did with the first logo. We copied the texture from the left side of the hat and the right side of the hat, and then we put those together. Now, if you need to recolor any of these areas, you can use clipping masks, and you can recolor these using hue, saturation, adjustment layers. Also, don't forget you can hit Control or Command T and bring up your transform dialog. From here, you can skew and warp your image into place. Simply hold Control or Command and click on any of the corners, and you can move your image into place, repeating a texture perfectly. For the next logo, which was a large area on our subject shirt, we actually used the brush tool to remove most of that. Simply hold Alt or Option to sample the color that you'd like right next to the logo and paint right over it. Then I recommend using a large soft edge brush to smooth everything out. Now, areas like the hair, I didn't use the brush tool there, okay? We needed a lot more detail. So that's when we used the clone stamp tool to fill that in. And then finally, for the logo on the hat, we used our clone stamp tool to replicate a similar texture. Then we moved it up and transformed it into place. Now, it had a little bit too much contrast and too much color. So what we did is brought a hue, saturation, adjustment layer. We lowered down the saturation, and then I used a couple brightness/contrast layers to lower down the contrast and darken it down a little bit. And that's all there is to it, guys, how to remove logos from clothing in Photoshop. Thanks so much for watching today's episode, guys. I hope you had a great time learning how to remove logos. So the next time your client says, "Can we get rid of that thing on the piece of clothing?" you can say, "Yes, I can," and that will be an extra $100, please. Thanks so much, guys. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone. Black right here on the edge of our layer mask. Hey there, how's it going? I'm right back here. Hey, what's up? Oh, Instacart. What's up, man? Yeah, I appreciate it. Hey, can someone help with the Instacart? Bloopers. Like there are any bloopers. Like I mess up ever. Like we get groceries delivered in the middle of an episode. Okay,